so much. Thank you. Thank you.
All right. We now move to Airservices Australia. Welcome, representatives from Airservices Australia. Do you wish to make an opening statement?
No, Senator.
All right. Senator Sheldon.
Thanks very much, Chair. And thank you for everyone joining us this afternoon. From questions on notice taken during the last round of estimates on the 14th of February, it was stated that all stages of the TRA process is yet to be fully completed because of the task resource analysis. My understanding is that a great deal of work in many of the key stages have now been completed. Would you be able to provide me on notice the set of task resource analysis that has been undertaken, provisional or otherwise? And of course, of the greatest interest are the outcomes of the TRA operational risk assessment stage, provisional or otherwise. Did you take that on notice?
Yes, Senator.
A key component of the TRA process is establishing, as we understand, the worst case plausible scenario. In theory, this scenario could occur at any time. Is that correct?
Senator, say that again. I just missed the last part of your question.
In theory, the worst case plausible scenario could occur at any time. Is that correct?
Senator, when we're doing any risk assessment, including doing something like the task resource analysis, is that we always have to take into what is the worst possible situation and assess the risks associated with that.
Thank you. And of course, the basis of that is that it could occur at any time. Is that correct?
Yes. Anything that's plausible, yes.
If the TRA operational risk assessments have been completed, identified higher extreme risk associated with current staffing levels, is it safe to leave that risk untreated?
Senator, if there was a risk such as a high level risk that is coming out of one of our analysis or data gathering phases, then we would put it through our normal risk management system, which we have across the organisation, to assess the validity of that risk and whether it is appropriately controlled at the present stage, and if it's not, what are the controls that we would have to put into place to mitigate that risk. So with any assessment that we would do, regardless of whether it's a task resource analysis, it's making a change in the air traffic operations, or doing a further change in our aviation rescue and firefighting, we would do a risk analysis and ensure that that risk was being mitigated. Just because an exercise identifies a certain risk doesn't mean that it is not being treated. We would then assess to ensure that it's being appropriately mitigated.
So who ultimately signs off on the risk assessments? And particularly in the case of higher extreme risk, but risk assessments generally?
So it depends on the level of risk throughout the organisation. Is that with our risk management system, depending on the classification of the risk, is where in the organisation it can be signed off on accepting what would be called the residual risk. So, for example, if something was identified as a high risk and after we had applied the controls would still be assessed as a high risk, then that risk would have to be signed off by a senior manager, if not an executive, to ensure that it's being managed to as low as reasonably practicable or to be accepted. And if they don't, then it has to be further mitigated.
But being mindful, thank you for that, being mindful of the work that's been completed during the TRA process, with the findings in hand, provisional or otherwise, if a worst case plausible scenario were to occur today in Sydney, for example, do you feel that Airservices would be at ease with the current risk appetite?
Senator, regardless of the analysis, the worst case scenario could happen today, regardless of whether we did a task resource analysis or not. It is part of the current operations, and we need to ensure every day, and we're oversighted by CASA, we have a safety management system to ensure that we're managing those risks and we're in a position to deal with those particular issues. When it comes to the task resource analysis, is that the current phase which has been completed, which is phase 1, which has been done at all 27 of our fire stations, is being on the data gathering exercise. We're now going through phase 2, which is the data analysis and validation piece, which is where we're actually doing the analysis and working through the information that has been gathered in the first phase, and we expect to complete that by the mid of this year, in June. And then the further phase is the implementation of those validated improvements, and that would be completed by the end of this calendar year. So the issues that may be recognised in this data gathering exercise through the TRA, they would exist today, and we would be mitigating those risks and ensuring we're in a position to deal with them today.
Thank you. As an aside, remaining on the question of minimum staffing, can I take this opportunity just to request a copy of the safety case submitted to CASA, which was used to qualify lowering staffing levels for Category 10 ARFFS provision on notice, please?
Yes, Senator. I just want to confirm there was a safety case submitted to CASA. Was it recently, or was this the one that was back in around about 2007?
I understand it's recently.
Okay, I'll take that on notice, Senator.
And at that point, if you could also just, the 2007 would be helpful as well for me anyway, because I wasn't around then.
Understood.
But neither of us were. Just want to go to a question about cost upgrade of a fire station from Category 7 to Category 8. Have you done any work in relationship to doing this in Hobart?
Senator, I have to take that on notice whether we've done some specific work with Hobart in particular, but we are continually reviewing changes in aircraft activity across our entire network, and we would ensure. Apologies, you switched screens. I feel like I'm sort of doing a sort of a TV, and I've got to look for the red light on the camera. Apologies for that. So we would continually assess category upgrades associated with the activity at the airport, and when we would move from Category 7 to Category 8, we would apply the appropriate changes to do that. Our funding model is built around servicing the various category requirements. So as a particular airport grows and the category increases, we would ensure that we are providing the right level of service. One of the things we are doing and have at Hobart is we've started to look at what would be a new fire station at some particular stage as the airport grows. Because if, not that you may be aware, but our fire station is right next to the terminal. So if they want to expand the terminal, we would have to move the fire station anyway, and we would always build a new fire station that would cater for growth and increases in category.
Right. Thank you for that. Just, who would pay for any upgrade?
We would, or through the airlines, through our fees.
Generally.
Through our fees.
Yep. Right. Thank you. I just want to go to some other matters. Just some questions about, is it right, if I understand correctly, the Brisbane flight paths, that the current Brisbane flight paths are being ripped up and redrawn?
Senator, is that this morning we released the interim report from Trax International. As mentioned, I engaged Trax International to provide a review of the Brisbane flight paths that was independent of the normal management chain. Engaged Tracks, who have got an international reputation for doing flight path change around Heathrow, Gatwick, and because of the length of time in putting in the new runway in Brisbane and the flight paths, I wanted somebody that was outside Australia to give a level of a different view. Their interim report, which we've released, comes up with 49 different recommendations that looks across a range of areas. And just to give you a framing for that, they're broken down into 5 particular categories. One is about maximising the flights over the bay. The second area is reducing noise impacts when overflying populations. Third is optimising noise sharing arrangements. The fourth is supporting sustainable growth in the airport's operations. And the fifth is enhancing engagement, coordination and governance processes. There are a range of short-term initiatives which we are pursuing and have been reported on through the Brisbane Airport Post-Implementation Review Advisory Forum and again in this TRACS report. And then there are some broader, longer-term changes which TRACS will continue to work through, and they'll be out here in the next few months doing some further community engagement with their final report due in June. But the holistic nature of what we are proposing and pursuing is not tinkering at the edges, but I wouldn't characterise it as ripping it all up.
Thank you. I want to just ask about with this recent announcement about these, as we've just run through, I understand there was the flight paths were redrawn in 2020 following the opening of the new runway. Is my understanding correct?
Senator, it's not my understanding, but I'll ask Mr Curran if he can add to that.
Senator, perhaps just it's a matter of us. Peter Curran, Airservices Chief Customer Experience and Strategy Officer. Just to clarify the question, if I may, are you referring to the deployment of flight paths associated with the operation, the initial operation of the new parallel runway in Brisbane?
That's correct. So following the opening of the new runway.
Yes, then it is the case that to support that new runway, new flight paths were designed and they commenced operation on the date that runway was opened in middle of 2020. I won't try and recall the exact date.
Thank you. Will the community forum become permanent?
Senator, that's a matter for the Minister in the department.
Has there been any? What's the community expression about making that forum permanent? Has there been? What's your reading of the community's wishes on that?
I am unsure, and I can't comment on that, Senator.
Is there anyone else there able to comment?
My advice is the forum's in place until September.
In September, is it completed then at this point as it stands at the moment, or is it reviewed and potentially extended, or was it just complete? It comes to completion in September.
So my advice is it would require a decision of Cabinet to become permanent, as they'd be quite significant appointments.
Thank you, Minister. Has there been any reductions to complaints since the trial of the alternative departure procedures? For example, height and full runway takeoffs and increased operations over the bay commenced?
Senator, I would have to take that on notice because we haven't done our sort of full analysis on our quarterly reporting on that since it's only been in since mid-February. But I can take it on notice to provide that detail.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. That's helpful. Can you explain why you've changed the flight paths prior to completion of the trial?
Senator,
the reason I'm raising that is because it then raises the question: do we know whether the trial worked?
Senator, we're not changing any of the flight paths as part of this trial or around it.
No,
so the trials that we're doing are changed to existing procedures. For example, extending the use of the simultaneous opposite direction parallel runway operations on the weekends, extending the hours of, or making all aircraft use the full length of the runway rather than using an intersection departure. There's no change to flight paths.
Good, thank you. Just want to just understand that and correct me if I'm wrong, just some information. Has Airservices Australia always had the ability to alter the airline pathways, the flight paths? And if so, I'm just wondering what circumstances can you and do you make changes?
So, Senator, just I missed a couple of words there. Just if I paraphrase the question, please correct me if I've got it wrong. Have we always been able to change or determine flight paths? And if so, how do we go about it? Is that...
In particular, in case of issues like airport noise, but yes, you've got it right. Thank you.
Yeah. So, simply, yes, we always have, as part of designing and managing the airspace. There is a full process and design principles that we utilise. There are certain design criteria that are published by the International Civil Aviation Organisation, as well as other regulations that sort of dictate the design of particular flight paths. And then when they are created and designed, there's a consultation process that goes along with it, which we are continuing to refine and improve on as time. In some locations where we've made the changes, we haven't delivered them right and probably haven't consulted appropriately, which some of the lessons over the years, which we continue to do so. There was a second part of your question, Senator, that I just want to make sure that I cover off.
Yeah, I just sort of go to the question about some of those reasons, or that you may change flight paths and the powers you have, where you can the power lies with you regarding. I might explain where the power lies. But for example, in the case of airport noise, that is, what are the steps? What authority does the Airservices Australia have to make changes, particularly in relationship to example noise?
Yeah. So the reason for making the change is not necessarily doing it, I'll call it, at a whim. There's usually either an operational or a change in the sense of, for example, Brisbane, a new runway that was established, which happened to be the first runway that we've really put in around the country at a major airport for over a generation or 25 years. The previous one was the third runway in Sydney. And so that dictated a design of all of the Brisbane flight paths. There are sometimes we might change a flight path because we're introducing a new takeoff or landing procedure, which would be a sort of not necessarily a minor change from an impact perspective, but rather than a redesign of a significant amount of flight paths, like for, say, the Brisbane Basin. When we are doing the flight paths, when the environment assessment associated with that, if it's classed as significant, we have to refer those to the Minister for Environment under the EBPCA Act and deal with whatever instructions or caveats that are put on from that. But the authority to make the change after all those processes have been completed does rest with Airservices.
Thank you. Was there I just want to go to a statement that was, I'm just getting my office to send it over to the Secretariat, but bear with me because it's the chair may be satisfied the way that I just handle it now, but there's a joint statement by LNP representatives today, 4th of April, headed Brisbane flight paths are being ripped up and redrawn. There's in that statement, which is under the signature of a number of MPs and LNP candidates, Trevor, a member for Brisbane, Mr. Trevor Evans, said that the issue transcends the election cycle. And if so, then why has it taken so long for the government to act on this issue and only making the announcement on the eve of the election? Mr. Evans has made it quite clear that it transcends the election cycle, but we're making it on the eve of the election about considering flight paths. Is there an explanation to that, Minister?
I'll have to take that on notice, Senator. Oh, sorry. I did that to stop the rustling of papers.
Yes.
I'll have to take that on notice, Senator. Obviously, an explanation of this level of detail is not one I'd be able to supply as the repping minister, but I'll see what the minister's got to say.
Thank you, Minister. I just want this general question. Is the process of redrawing the flight paths, does it involve contracts being tendered for to write that up, or is this something that internally is done by Airservices Australia?
Senator, that's part of our core business that we would do internally and consult on.
Thank you. And just going to this question of Trax International, how much has the contract with Trax International cost?
Senator, in the vicinity of $500,000.
Is there further, for completion of the contract, what's the full contract price for completion?
$500,000, Senator. That is for the full price for the delivery of the final report in June.
Thank you. So we've paid the money up front, or at what point are we with progress payments?
Senator, it's progress payments.
Correct.
Thank you. And how much so far are you aware?
Senator, I have to take that on notice.
Thank you. How long will it take to redraw the flight paths?
Senator, based on the recommendations that Trax and continuing to work through, particularly those longer term ones, which require and will require community consultation and particular engagement with a range of stakeholders to work through, and based on the fact that the assessment that's being done between now and the middle of the year is to make sure that they are feasible. What Trax have currently recommended is technically feasible, but we need to make sure that they are, I'll call it operationally feasible, but also don't have an adverse impact on the community, as an example. And so from that point of view, it could take anywhere between 18 months to potentially 2 years, depending on the amount of consultation and work that's required. I'd rather overestimate than underestimate.
Thank you for that. Is there a review period once the decision's made?
So, Senator, we're currently going through a post-implementation review, which the Trax work has sort of partially overtaken, but whatever changes that we do implement as a result, there will be a post-implementation review and further assessment to make sure that they're meeting the requirements that were actually set out to be achieved in the first place.
Would you mind just stepping me through how that timeline might work in a review period once the decision's been made about the implementation of the redrawn flight paths?
Yeah, can I take that on notice so that we can provide the accurate detail of a sort of a timeline appropriate, if that's suitable, or if it's acceptable?
If you give it to me, you can give it to me broadly now and in detail later, if that works.
Yeah, so I'll ask Mr Curran to just step through it very briefly, and if that doesn't satisfy your requirement, Senator, we can provide more detail.
Thank you, Senator. Broadly, as it relates to Brisbane, Tracks International will complete their final report between now and June. In the process of completing that final report, they'll come out and participate in community workshops and consultation activities in May, June. That will help inform and sharpen up some of the possible options that they've been exploring. Airservices will then take the final report and include that into the post-implementation review, which will include the possibility of a fairly significant redesign of the terminal airspace around Brisbane, but also a range of other nearer-term activities. In broad terms, we would undertake extensive consultation, putting out first a draft proposal of flight paths. This is assuming the larger scale redesign. A draft proposal that would involve extensive community consultation as well as industry consultation to understand the impacts of that change. It would involve targeted community information provision, local level workshops, letterbox drops, a whole range of social media and media tools to engage with community. And we would then take that information in to look to come to a final draft proposal. We would take that draft proposal and then make adjustments based on the consultation inputs that we've received, and then reach a proposed final design. That proposed final design would then go out for community feedback so that there was a closed loop with community around the consultation that took place. That whole process, as Mr Harfield said, can take between 18 months to 2 years, depending on the extent of the proposed change. But we're probably painting the most significant redesign scenario there.
Thank you. And just the review period after the final analysis in 18 months, 2 years, and those steps being followed, can you roughly step me through the review period after that?
So if I understand the question correctly, Senator, having made a final proposal to the community, we would then implement that change pending any final feedback, make that implementation, and then typically our post-implementation review process requires a 12-month period, and that's because we're looking to see operations take place over all seasons so we can understand whether the forecast impacts and the actual impacts, what differences there have been. So typically there's a 12-month period before the PIR commences, and we then would undertake a post-implementation review of that change.
And thanks very much for that. That's been very helpful. Back to you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Senator Sheldon. And I just want to ask some questions on the same topic of the Brisbane Airport noise, and to congratulate the great advocacy of the local members who drove the issue for local residents. So the new airstrip was opened when?
The new runway?
Runway. I knew I had that wrong, but I just thought I'll go with it. You'll know what I'm talking about.
June 2020.
I think June 2020 is correct. It was certainly mid-2020,
Yep.
Senator.
Just in time for the complete shutdown of the aviation industry. How devastating that would have been. So it must have taken a little while for flight path noise to become, I'm not sure, shall I address this to you, Mr Curran? For flight path noise to become an issue, because there wouldn't have been a lot of activity for the first 6 months, 9 months?
That's the case, Senator, yes.
Okay. And so once aircraft started travelling again, and I guess particularly with freight, would have been their biggest payload at that time?
Senator, just to add a bit to it, I think that adds to it, is that because it opened up in the middle of 2020 and borders were shut around that particular time with Queensland, a lot of the traffic was intrastate Queensland traffic. As a result of that traffic utilised the new runway because of the way the operations, because it was going to the north. So they used the newer runway, which meant there was more activity on that runway and not on the legacy runway at that particular stage. The other element that did create, I call it noise issues, was because the capacity had shrunk, that instead of using the normal jet aircraft, they were the turboprop aircraft, which make a little bit extra noise. So we actually started getting noise complaints not long after the opening of the runway due to the very significant change in operations created by the board. And then as traffic then picked up, then it created further issues.
And so when was the community forum appointed?
Senator, off the top of my head, I can't answer. It would have been about 6 months ago, I think.
It would be in the last quarter of 2021, September, October 2021 is my recollection.
So a bit over a year after the new runway opened, and okay, terrific. So, and I assume that the Deputy Prime Minister, the Minister for Transport, arranged for that forum or organised for that forum to be appointed?
That's my understanding, Senator, yes.
Yes, terrific. And that was in response, no doubt, to the local representatives, particularly Trevor Evans and Julian Simmons, their advocacy for that appointment?
I don't know what the major driver was, Senator.
Have those members of Parliament been to see Airservices?
I have briefed Trevor Evans as an example, and other candidates, not just the government side, opposition side, or local members.
Not
Local members.
a candidate. There's no election being
Sorry,
called. He's a local member of Parliament and a great assistant minister for this government.
Terrific. And, well, I mean, I guess I too am aware that, you know, local residents have been impacted by the new activities or the changed activities, and I'm you know, I applaud how quickly this has been identified and brought to a head with the forum making these recommendations, which have been responded to. And I think the strong words that Senator Sheldon were quoting about flight paths being ripped up and redrawn would probably be a response to the community's level of distress around noise concerns. So I congratulate everybody for you know, being responsive to those changes. I want to ask you though, one of the things that that was raised was curfews for Brisbane. Sydney has curfews, Melbourne has curfews. What would it do to Australia's flights and freight routes and whatnot if we had similar curfews?
Senator, that's a policy position, and I have to refer you to the department.
Oh, fair enough. Okay, I should have asked them when we had them here earlier. All right, well, I think that is, you know, it's a great step forward that the Airservices has responded to the community's concerns via the representatives. I think that's terrific. I wanted to ask you just a final question before we let you go. I'm not sure if you heard earlier today, I've been asking questions of the department and other agencies about advice provided to the Deputy Prime Minister as Minister for Transport around airfields and airstrips and airports and all those things. Can I assume that you were consulted around the 21 airports that fall under the Airports Act if a master plan is brought forward?
Yes, Senator.
Right. And when you provide advice to the Minister, do you consider general aviation and the activities of the broader aviation sector, or is your focus commercial airlines and passenger throughput? What is the sort of framework that you provide advice on?
So in regards to our advice to the Minister is a technical assessment that we do against the noise forecast that is in the master plan that's there. We don't comment on whether the forecast is accurate or not, just the technical nature of the forecast that's put there. We, on our own volition, separate to that, we will get consulted by the airport on it, and it's around the provision of our services at that airport. to make sure, for example, that if there's air traffic control there, is there, or in future, a location that's suitable for a fire station, for example, if it reaches the certain threshold, or if we've got like a radar or navigation equipment, whether anything they're doing on the airport won't interfere with that, but nothing in the sense of what would be doing for a forecast on growth.
Right. So, so it's very functional, your advice
Yes.
around activity and noise and footprint and whatnot.
Yeah, the technical assessment of not whether the forecast or what the airport is portraying will happen, the technical accuracy of what they've put forward.
Yes, right, okay. All right, well, my search continues for an advocate for general aviation within the agencies. We've heard information from the department about the GAN and the advice that provides, but we just don't really have an agency that provides that kind of input and support to the departments around master planning for those bigger airports and for the council-operated airports separately. So my search will continue. The Holy Grail. Senator Sheldon looks like he has something else he wants to say. Do you have another question, Senator Sheldon?
Yeah, just briefly, Chair. I just wondering, the department, what the effect would be if the community forum was no longer temporary but permanent. And the reason I'm asking it because Labor last week committed to the forum being permanent. But I'm interested about if you'd able to tell us what the effect might be if there was a permanent community forum.
Senator, that's a policy question that I need to refer you to the department.
Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Senator Sheldon. Well, I believe that takes us to the end of our examination for Airservices, so please go with the committee's thanks. And that concludes today's proceedings. The